Good evening, everybody, and welcome to our autumn discovery series. I can't quite believe I'm saying that. Haven't quite got my head around the fact that it's October yet, but the rain on my way in and the way home today definitely persuaded me. So we're back to give you a series of events, obviously talking about wildlife and the holidays that we offer. And we're really excited because we're sort of going right in there to the end of the world. So the first one we've got tonight, really excited to have Isabelle with us from Aurora. So we are working on with Aurora on a voyage in 2026. So Isabelle's going to talk us through some of what to expect. Most of you know, I think, how these work now. So Isabelle's going to talk for sort of half an hour, 40 minutes or so. I'm then going to take over and just show a few photos just because we can't really get enough of Antarctica. And then there'll be a Q&A session at the end. So there's a button, there are a couple of buttons, they keep changing it, so forgive me if it's changed, but there's a Q&A and a chat function underneath. So if you do have any questions, then please do let us know. So yeah, we're lucky to have Isabelle with us. Isabelle has been with Aurora since 2019, leading expeditions since 2018, and the lucky thing's been to Antarctica 4 times, and this season's about to be her 5th in December, so I'm very jealous. But I can't wait to hear more. So yeah, I will stop rambling. Please grab a cup of tea, and Isabelle, I'll hand over to you.
Thank you so much. Very happy to be here. Good evening, everybody. As you heard, my name's Isabelle. I'm right now down here near Land's End in Cornwall, but dreaming already of going back to Antarctica in December. And this talk, I'm just going to be sharing with you some information about the Antarctic Circle trip, how it works, a bit about life on board, perhaps a little bit about the wildlife we can expect to see in February, and expedition as a whole. So I'm very happy to be here and to be talking with you. So the Antarctic Circle trip is going from Ushuaia, in the southern point of Argentina, down through the Drake Passage to the Antarctic Peninsula, often via the South Shetland Islands here. The trips are around 11-12 days, and there are actually not so many trips in the season that go all the way down to the Antarctic Circle. It's quite a stretch to get down there. There's so many fantastic landing sites on the way. But and it's very much governed by weather and ice conditions as well, which makes it even more exciting. So as you just heard, my name's Isabelle. I work very much with Aurora Expeditions, which is an Australian expedition company. I've been doing this sort of thing since around 2016. I started working in the Arctic anyway, and this will be my 5th Antarctic season down in the south. And I absolutely love it. I love my job. I love sharing exciting places with people. I work on board as an expedition leader, and facilitating life-changing trips for people is something I'm very privileged to be doing. So here we are, the Antarctic Circle. So the Antarctic Circle is very much a geographical boundary, a weather boundary, and also a geopolitical boundary, which I'm sure many of you know about already. The Antarctic Peninsula is an incredibly special place. In Antarctica in the whole, it's probably the most visited part of Antarctica, simply because, as you can see here on this chart, it's the most accessible from another landmass, from South America. So the trips work by heading out to sea, and it takes about 2 days at sea, crossing the Drake's Passage to get down to the Antarctic Peninsula. And this passage across the Drake is something really special about these voyages. Sea days are not just waiting time to get to the action. They're really integral parts of the trip, which involve preparing for Antarctica, doing the safety briefings, and also it's when the lectures happen. This is where we learn from the experts on board all about the voyage, all about what we can expect in Antarctica. We hear from naturalists, geologists, glaciologists on board, all about their expertise. And that really helps us form our experience of Antarctica and deepens the knowledge of our time there as well. And the Drake Passage can be absolutely fantastic weather a lot of the time, and it changes very often. It's like going through some kind of a portal to another world. And we always say there's the life before you go to Antarctica and life after you've been to Antarctica. It's that much of a transformative place to go. Here we are. Here's a little bit more detail on the Antarctic Peninsula. So I don't know if you can see there at the very top of the South Shetland Islands. And because this is an expedition, we don't necessarily have a set itinerary. And that is the beauty of a trip like this. We can chop and change depending on weather conditions, on sea ice conditions, and we are also on a very small vessel, which I'll talk about in just a moment. And again, this gives us flexibility to change our plans and get everybody on and off the ship quickly, which is fantastic. Here we go. This is the vessel that we do our trips on. This is the Greg Mortimer. As you can see, it's got a bit of a funny shaped bow, hasn't it? So the Greg Mortimer is an X-bow. And the X-bow is a design of ship which actually started out in the North Sea in the early 2000s. And it was made for vessels in the North Sea going out to do oil work and that type of thing. And the Greg Mortimer actually was the first passenger vessel with this design. So why would you build a ship to look so irregular and unusual? Well, it actually handles sea conditions really very well. Instead of the up and down sort of slamming motion that a traditionally built ship can have in big seas, the Greg Mortimer doesn't move like this. It really does slice through the waves with a lot more grace and comfort. The Greg Mortimer is about 100 meters in length, and it was specially designed as an expedition vessel. And this means that so much thought went into the designing of the ship in order, as I said, to get us on and off quickly. It was named after the actual Greg Mortimer, who some of you may know as quite a famous Australian mountaineer. In fact, the first Australian to have summited Everest. And he started Aurora expeditions about 30 years ago. Because Greg would go to these places on his personal expeditions, and they thought, how can we bring our friends to these incredible but inaccessible places? Well, he set up Aurora to do just that. And that spirit of bringing your friends along and adventure and all-togetherness really carries on to this day. So, what do the days look like? What does our trip look like? Once we arrive in Antarctica, we try to get off the ship as much as we can. As you know, everything is weather and ice dependent, but us as expedition leaders, together with the captain, will be planning ahead and moving the ship around to all the best places to make the most of the weather and the fantastic landing sites that Antarctica has to offer. So we do aim to get off the ship twice a day, after breakfast and again after lunch in the afternoon. Of course, that changes. Sometimes perhaps we need to cover a little bit more ground to get to another place. That might mean a little bit longer on board. But generally speaking, we do love to get off the ship twice a day in two different spots. And the beauty of being a relatively small ship, as in not many people over 100 passengers, is that we can get everybody off at one time and all experience something fantastic together. There's very little waiting around. We get off as much as we can. We maximize our time off the ship, have a real adventure before getting back on board to great food and a comfortable, warm ship. Actually, it can be quite disarming to be in such a wild place on such a comfortable ship. So as Greg Mortimer does like to say, even though the ship is comfortable and fantastic, even on the coldest, windiest, wettest days, it's always worth putting in the effort and getting off the ship, because that's often when the magic happens, when you least expect it. So we try to do a fair few landings because of course we love to get up close to the nature as much as we can. We love to set foot on ground, to explore some of the historical sites, which I'll talk a little bit about later. And as you can see here from this beautiful photo, this is a place called Portal Point in Antarctica, on the Antarctic Peninsula. And historically, Portal Point, as you can maybe guess from the name, was the access point for quite a few of the historic trans-Antarctic Peninsula expeditions back in the day. So we do love to do a bit of hiking, and depending on your interests and your abilities and what you feel like that day, you'll have different options about what you might like to do when you get to shore. We also like to jump into our Zodiacs and explore this way too. So being Antarctica, of course, we are extremely remote, which is very exciting. That obviously means there are no piers, no docks to bring the ship alongside. So either we are anchoring the ship or the ship is drifting, and we get on and off using these Zodiacs here, which are absolutely fantastic. So sometimes if we want to explore and we need to cover a lot of distance, or perhaps at a glacier face, the Zodiacs are the perfect vehicle to do this. It also offers us a completely different perspective of some of the wildlife we might be lucky enough to see in Antarctica, whether that's seeing whales from the Zodiac, where you're pretty much at water level with big cetaceans, or perhaps it's going underneath some really tall bird cliffs and looking up at the birds, watching them in their natural environment, in their breeding habitat, in their nests, all this type of thing. Perhaps it's being almost at eye level with some penguins who are nesting in a rookery on shore. The Zodiacs are a very useful tool to help us get out there. Here's just a photo of the back of the marina at the back of the ship, where the expedition team jumps in every morning or every afternoon to prepare the Zodiacs for that operation that day. Like I said, the Greg Mortimer is very much purpose-built for expedition, and you'll see that all throughout the ship. Here we go in a very different type of weather. We've got a very typically Antarctic day here. And this photo is taken at a place called Enterprise Island, where there's this fantastic wreck of an old Norwegian whaling ship. It's called the Governoren. And the beautiful thing about this ship now is that nature has really taken over. This is a place that we visit on some trips, but certainly not all of the trips. As we nose up to the ship with our Zodiacs, we can often see that Antarctic terns have built their nests all over the ship now. So depending on what time of year we go there, we'll often see chicks nesting on the ship. It's really quite beautiful. And some of the expeditioners, the passengers, also like to hop into kayaks as well and explore that way too, which is lovely. It's very peaceful, none of that Zodiac engine sound, and you get a very, very close encounter with all the different types of ice and sometimes even the wildlife as well. When we have a larger area to explore, often the ship is the best platform to be on. As you can see, there's lots of great areas to view, lots of good visibility. There's viewing platforms all over the ship. And also here you can see towards the front, there are our hydraulic platforms, which come down when the weather's appropriate, when it's nice and calm, essentially. And you can stand directly over the water and look down. And you can even see the bow of the ship from there, moving slowly through the sea ice, pushing it out the way. It's really quite special. Here we are, another very icy landscape. And this is the beautiful thing about the Antarctic Circle trip. It's a completely different type of landscape when you get down that far south, that far below the Antarctic Circle. Things change quite a bit down there. The mountains look different to the northern part of the peninsula. Everything is just a little bit more dramatic, and there's a lot more ice as well. I'll talk about that a bit more later. And I think some of you might be interested in wildlife. That's what I've heard anyway. And if you like wildlife, then Antarctica is just quite overwhelming, in fact. The sheer scale of the wildlife, the amount, and it's very much a full sensory experience to go and enjoy the wildlife on the Antarctic Peninsula. Here we have some fantastic little Adelie chicks. And if you were to go to Antarctica in February, it's a great time for seeing chicks at their most playful, curious, cheeky. They are just wonderful to watch. And I always think the more you just stand quietly and observe the behavior of the penguin chicks or whatever wildlife it might be, the more you absorb, the more you learn about what we're here to and lucky enough to experience. Again, that's the great thing about being on quite a small vessel, is that we can just take the time to stand and watch almost for as long as we want. It's really very magical. So here we have some Adelie penguin chicks, and this is one of the 3 species of brush-tail penguins, along with the chinstrap and the gentoo, which are possible to be seen on the Antarctic Peninsula. And Adelies were actually one of the favourite species of the early Antarctic explorers. So the polar heroes such as Scott and Amundsen, they wrote about them a lot in their journals. And actually, Scott's diarist, Cherry Garrard, who was the one who wrote The Worst Journey in the World, wrote a fantastic little paragraph about Adelies I'd love to read to you. They are extraordinarily like children, these little people of the Antarctic world, either like children or like old men, full of their own importance and late for dinner in their black tailcoats and white shirt fronts, and rather portly withal. And that is such a fantastic observation of these little creatures. Here we are, a rather graphic photo here of a penguin parent, could be male or female. They look pretty much identical, and they care for the chick 50-50, both the males and the females, as do many seabirds, as I'm sure you know. So this Adelie would have been out there risking its life at sea, filling up on krill, eating as much Antarctic krill as it can before returning to the nest and feeding its very hungry and probably very insistent fluffy chick that they have here. Adelies are quite special in that they always look a bit surprised. They have this white ring of skin around the eyes you can see in this photo, and it gives them quite a humorous facial expression, as you can see here as well. And also coming at this time of the year, the chicks are starting to get slightly more independent, and it allows us to really get a good insight into some quite special behavior of the chicks. So here, for example, we can see the sort of feeding following behavior that the chick will do as it's starting to fledge. So what's happening here is that the parent, again, either male or female, will be leading the chicks away from the nest towards the sea. At some point, the chick is almost as big as the parent, and the parent's getting pretty fed up with having to bring food back to it day after day. So the parent will start to run away from the nest, often at really quite high speeds, down towards the water's edge to teach their chicks, to show them where they need to go to feed independently. And this can be quite amazing to watch. So here's a photo of a molting Adelie. So they all molt their baby feathers off before going to sea, and they get covered in their fantastic waterproof, life-proof feathers, which they need as their baby down, of course, isn't yet waterproof. So as I said, we also sometimes see chin straps, and gentoos are fantastic. Probably the most commonly seen brush-tail penguin on the Antarctic Peninsula. They're wonderful. They are the biggest species of brush-tail. They're about knee-high and just wonderful. Again, very charismatic, lots of interesting feeding behavior, very social, wonderful to watch, and endlessly photogenic, as I'm sure you know. That's it for penguins for now. It's very possible that we might see some seal species as well. So this one, I just wanted to highlight one, is the very fearsome leopard seal. They're mostly solitary, Really quite astonishing animals. They have this very reptilian lizard-like face, as people like to call it. And as you can see here, quite some teeth on them as well. So the leopard seals are the main predator, one of the main predators, other than predatory birds such as skuas, of penguin chicks. So the penguins, the young ones who fledge and go to sea for the first time, they are very easy pickings for leopard seals. February and March, late season Antarctica, is the best time of the season if you want to see whales. So lots of these whale species, they migrate down to Antarctica to eat in the cold waters, which are full of krill. The species such as the humpback whale will be migrating from their breeding grounds, which could be perhaps around Hawaii, around Ecuador, maybe around Peru, and they'll be swimming down the coast and arriving in Antarctica, probably January, February kind of time. During their migration, they can lose about a quarter of their body weight. And so they come to Antarctica, feed on as much krill as possible, put on much weight before going back up north, back to their breeding grounds once again. So seeing humpback whales is always quite astonishing, no matter where it is in the world. We do sometimes get some really quite wonderfully close encounters. Especially as the season goes on a bit, we notice that the whales they've eaten a bit more and they relax and they can become very interactive as well. It can be really amazing. Other than humpback whales, we sometimes see minke whales, sometimes see killer whales now and then. Fin whales as well are very special to see, the second largest whale in the world. Here are a few more humpback photos. So as you can see here, we do have some really wonderful sightings. And this is when being in a Zodiac is the absolute best platform. We can turn off the engine so we're not causing too much disturbance or too much noise pollution to the very sensitive whales, and just sit there in silence. All we can hear is the ice cracking and the whales coming up, exhaling, inhaling, before carrying on in their... Here we go, here's another humpback photo looking right into the blowhole in this one. I did want to mention something as well about our citizen science program. Citizen science is something at Aurora Expeditions that we love to participate in. Of course, Antarctica is very remote and very expensive for scientists to access and to carry out their important work. So some of the ships that go to Antarctica like to go down as a vessel of opportunity and either help out the scientific community by perhaps giving them lifts to research stations in Antarctica, but also by encouraging our participants, the passengers in the expedition, to help us with citizen science. And that could be measuring the amount of plankton in the water, it could be doing a microplastic survey, bird surveys, NASA cloud studies, it could be all sorts of things like this. So citizen science is something that we really focus on quite a bit on every single trip that we do. Another quite wonderful thing about the south of the Antarctic Circle trip is the added layer of Antarctic history that we get to experience from being down there. So as you well know, in the Antarctic Peninsula, there are no permanent people living there. There are some research stations, some science stations, and also some bases, disused bases. This one, for example, is Stonington. Stonington was built in 1947 and built as a weather station, a research station, and this is one of the most southerly points that you would be able to get to. It's really quite far south, often blocked by ice, often quite tricky weather, but as you can see, an absolutely astonishing place. Stonington was actually the location of where the first female participant, the first woman, actually overwintered in Antarctica. and that was in 1947 here in Stonington. So a very historically important place. Here you can see it on a completely different type of day. And inside these stations, it's a very, very well preserved archive of how life was there decades ago. There's still a lot of remnants of food supplies, of notes, of journals, of old scientific equipment. It's really quite amazing. And the amount that we can learn from this, both by going into the huts, it's very much, we're very much encouraged to go in and experience it firsthand. There's no sort of barriers up or anything like this. It's all about going there and experiencing it for ourselves. With Antarctica being relatively rarely visited, yes, there are maybe a few more passengers going to Antarctica every year, but still on the grand scheme of things, it's a pretty special place to visit that few people get to go to in their life. That means that when we go down there, we take people very educated, very prepared about Antarctica and the trip. And it means that we get access to these places. It means we get access to very significant historical places and also access to very special wildlife too. This is from Horseshoe Island, which is also in Marguerite Bay, the same place as Stonington. And another really important element, and memorable, I would say, of our time in Antarctica is simply the ice. The ice forms everything about our trip. The ice allows us or stops us from going to certain places. There's the glacial ice, which we'll see plenty of here. So here in this photo, for example, this is right next to some very big calving glaciers. These calving glaciers are producing a huge amount of icebergs, which are breaking down into brash ice. And taking the Zodiac through this labyrinth of ice is always very exciting, and it makes for beautiful photos as well. And then, of course, there is the sea ice. So the sea ice is so important. The sea ice actually, here's a photo of the sea ice extent in August this year. In the winter, the size of the Antarctic continent essentially doubles with the sea ice all around it. And at around, I think it was September the 19th, so last month, that's when the maximum sea ice was reached for this year, this southern winter. And now it will be starting to melt down again, starting to shrink again in size. The sea ice is so important because underneath the sea ice, this is where the Antarctic krill hatch. The Antarctic krill shelter under the protective layer of sea ice, and they eat the algae once they're hatched from underneath. The more sea ice there is, simply the more krill there will be that year. And this is the basis of the whole of the Antarctic food web. Every single animal, fish, bird, seal, is completely dependent on krill. So sea ice is exactly what we need. We need more sea ice because this is the nursery for the krill. On a good krill year, we do see an immediate knock-on effect of this. We do see even more penguins being successfully hatched, successfully reared and fledged, even more seals, even more seabirds. And then, of course, in February and March, we often see even more whales as well, coming down to feed in this extremely nutrient-rich cold water. Some of the icebergs that we see are absolutely astonishing. I think often people come to Antarctica for various reasons, often very wildlife focused, which is fantastic. And that is so memorable. And also the ice is just as memorable as well. As you can see here, it's quite an overcast day, which makes for better ice photos because they often look a lot more blue and the colours pop out a lot more. For some of our Zodiac cruises, we tend to go and just do this. We just go and explore some ice. every day in Antarctica is really very different, and the expedition leader and the expedition team always work to ensure that we do get a bit of everything into our really precious time that we have down there. That means as much variety of wildlife as is possible, history, ice, good landings, the whole package. You can see here in this photo that see the different layers of ice. There are different horizontal layers showing the different years of snowfall that have fallen onto the glacier and compacted. So when all of this snow falls onto the glacier, the ice actually changes its molecular structure and bonds together into these huge blocks of ice. And eventually the glaciers will carve out, and this is what we have the pleasure of seeing. Carved glaciers producing incredible icebergs. And we can see this more or less all along the western coast of the Antarctic Peninsula. Here we have a little insight into life on board the ship. So, as I was saying, a normal day, although there is no normal day on board, a normal day would look like an outing of some kind after breakfast, coming back on board for a good buffet lunch, some kind of outing again in the afternoon, and then coming back on board for dinner and to enjoy the bar. In the top left-hand corner, we have the observation lounge, which is the topmost lounge on deck 8. And this has the most incredible view all the way around. This is a really beautiful place to sit either on the sea days or in the evening with a drink after dinner. And remember as well that it's still going to be really very light. There's going to be lots of hours of daylight. However, because it will be February and later, the colours in the sky will start to develop more and more. So it's a fantastic time of year for photography, for landscape as well as wildlife. Top right, as you can see, we have our hydraulic platforms, which we get out when we can. And in the bottom right-hand corner, we have a photo of the restaurant where they serve up some really quite wonderful food. And here we have a photo of a few different selections of cabins. So these aren't exclusively the only cabin types there are, but I just wanted to give you a little bit of an example of what they look like. As I said, the ship is very, very comfortable. The rooms are warm. Everyone has their own private bathroom. You can see on the top left, we have the porthole cabin. This is on deck 3. Below that is the balcony cabin A. These have a balcony, a lovely large window, and plenty of space. And the balcony cabin superior, which is the next grade up again. And bottom right is the captain's suite, it has a couple of different rooms to it. It's very spacious, very, very comfortable room. So here's a little bit of an example of how we live on board. As I was saying, it is really quite disarming to be out in one of the most wild places in the world, in all kinds of weathers, and coming back on board to dry off. One of the top tips I always tell people is, if you come back on board and you're cold and wet and all your outer layers are soaking wet, put the underfloor heating on in your bathroom. You put the underfloor heating on and put all your damp clothes on top of there. They will dry off in no time and be nice and toasty and dry for you to go out again for the next outing, ready to go and all warmed up. Well, thank you so much, everybody. I covered some things. I'm sure there are things that I didn't cover, but I hope that is a start anyway to inform you about the Greg Mortimer, about Aurora Expeditions, and about the Antarctic Circle trip. Thank you, everyone.
Oh, thank you so much, Isabel. Oh my gosh. It's amazing. I'm stuck on the underfloor heating at the moment. I can't believe when you come back and your feet are so cold just to have that. Oh, that'll be amazing. Right. So there's probably a lot of questions. So please do start popping those onto the chat. I was lucky enough to get to Antarctica in November. So I actually did the circuit of South Georgia, Falkland, South Georgia, and Antarctica. So I think when just listening to you as well, honestly, when you say it is kind of, it's such a life-changing experience. And I think it is like a portal, isn't it? You get to Ushuaia and it's been a long journey and you're kind of there and it all feels really surreal. And then suddenly you just start seeing these icebergs pop up and you think, what is going on? Um, so I really just wanted to well, show you some photos really, because I just want to talk about it. So I'm going to show you just a few photos, really focusing on the trip that we're doing in 2026, if I can. There we go. So it's the Antarctic Circle Penguin and Whale Safari. So obviously you've had an idea of what the ship's like, and there's about up to 130 or so people on the ship. So we're gonna hopefully have a group of 14 people, and then there'll be myself and Helen Bryan. I realized I didn't properly introduce myself at the beginning, so apologies. But for those who don't know me, my name is Emma. And so I'm a full-time team member at Wildlife Worldwide, but I also lead some of our photography trips. So the goal is really to have kind of one Zodiac, where we're focusing more on the photography side of things. And then Helen's one, any of you who know Helen will know she's a bit like a Duracell bunny and absolutely loves whales, and all wildlife. So between us, we hope to kind of give you a bit of a variety. But we've got specific Zodiacs with 7 people in each plus us. So you've got enough space. And then that's the hope that, especially for the photographers, there's enough space for kind of bags and things. But I wanted to just show you a few because I think a lot of people, it is an expensive trip and it's a long way to go and it's a big thing. And a lot of people have a lot of questions. And I think I was quite surprised at how easy it was in a lot of ways. So I'm focusing obviously on the penguins and whales. I took 3 lenses with me. There are a lot of questions about baggage, so we'll get onto that later. But I took with me 100 to 500 lens and a 70 to 200, and then just a wide angle for any of the other stuff, which I very rarely used. I think I actually only used it once because I had my phone. So really, it's something that you can do quite easily with a couple of lenses. And I think a lot of photographers can get carried away. And I think it's not worth it. It's an incredible place to see. It's partly about the experience. The lovely thing about it is that there's no set itinerary. I think with a lot of our trips, sometimes it can be quite, formulaic, and you go in the morning, you go in the afternoon, you do this. And with this, you just think, well, we're, people like Isabelle do it for us, and we just kind of go along and see all the amazing wildlife there. So just kind of have a camera. But my one piece of advice would be to always have a camera with you, whether you're a photographer or not. Have your phone, because you never really know what's going to happen. But these are just a few of Gen 2 penguins. These are the babies, slightly younger than when Isabelle showed. I was there, like I say, end of November. So hopefully these guys will be running around somewhere and in February causing mayhem. But then, like Isabelle said, the Adelis were the favorite of some of the explorers, but also me. I completely fell in love with them. They're a bit, they are like sort of unruly kids running around. So they're fantastic to photograph. And I think character-wise, they're kind of interested in you. And like you said, with their eyes, I always think if a kid drew a penguin, it would be an Adele, wouldn't it? Like with the stick-on eyes that you get from the shops, it's what they look like, and they are just fantastic to watch. So you're quite often a lot of another thing we get asked a lot is, being eye level, and everybody worried about that. But a lot of the time, Antarctica's not flat; it is hilly, and so a lot of these were taken actually standing on a hill, and they walk towards you, or they're higher than you, or they're lower than you. So there's always some really interesting opportunities. They're always really interested in you. There was one landing, I think it was Brown Bluff, and we pulled up, and I just stood there, and I was sort of standing off the edge of the Zodiac, and I thought, well, I used to work in central London, and I thought it was a bit like being a tourist in Piccadilly, where, we'd be quick marching to Boots or whatever to get our sandwich, and there's just this row of people walking, not looking left or right, and then there's these tourists going, can we, oh, never mind. And it was exactly like that. Like these penguins just walk straight along the beach, and you have to wait for a break in the penguin crowd to be able to get onto the beach. And just standing there and watching it all unfold it's such a privilege. And they're just amazing. So then you get a good couple of hours to wander around among them and kind of pretend you're one of them. And like this, they wander around up and down the hills. So you get groups, you get individuals, but it's just the most amazing experience. And this one was from a Zodiac. So as Isabel said, that can be a really good opportunity for just seeing something a bit different. So this is the inside of an iceberg. And this penguin was just perched on the inside of the iceberg, watching the world go by. And we just sort of went round a couple of times to see him. And then also chin straps. So these guys are real characters, and I don't know about you, I was talking to a colleague about this earlier, but I tend to anthropomorphize animals quite a lot. And I always imagine these guys with a really strong Mexican accent kind of running around like they're just like the little comedians of Antarctica, and they're fantastic to watch, and they throw themselves around. And so there's always just really fun things to be seen. And whether you're on a landing or off a Zodiac or whatever it is, on a Zodiac, don't get off a Zodiac. You will always, there's always something to entertain you. And even if there are 100 or 50 people on the landing, there's always somewhere for you to go and get that shot that you want and get away from the crowd. So seals also, I know Isabel mentioned leopard seals, but Weddell seals are also absolutely gorgeous, and they just kind of lie there and stare at you with their beautiful eyes and then, pose for you, which is amazing. So there are really lovely opportunities with them. And then when you're on the ship, so often people are, there's lots of days at sea, and what do we do? That you're never alone when you're at sea, even when it's a horrible sea day and everybody's, potentially inside hiding. The people on the deck get the best experiences. So you see, like this city, Albatross, they always circle the ship. They are there no matter what, because they have no choice. Sometimes they'll land on the ship, sometimes they'll nest on the ship. But it's a really nice way to get them eye level. You can get underneath them, you can get on top of them. So when they're kind of at sea level. So there's just always things to see. Like Isabel said, if we're lucky, we'll get to see some more, because we had one experience with them on my voyage, and it was amazing. Very brief, but incredible to see them. And also with the humpbacks. And again, like with Isabel, these guys came close enough to the ship to get between us and the Zodiacs that were just getting ready to get us onto. So the Zodiacs had to move back a bit to let the whales have a bit of a play and go away. But they were there for a good half an hour, 40 minutes, and they're so relaxed. So yeah, that's about it. I just wanted to, like I say, show you some ideas. And I think the time that we're going, and I think the one thing about having your camera with you all the time for me is this was, I think, in the middle of dinner, and the light was just stunning one evening. And I just kind of looked out the window and everything went quite dark, and suddenly the sun just lit up this iceberg, and I was just like out on the deck, and you just see people always popping in and out. So yeah, it's definitely not a voyage to do if you like a lot of sleep, but if you're up for an adventure, it is absolutely incredible and life-changing. So yes, I'm going to shut up now and ask, are there any questions? I can see there are some, so let's hang on a second. How am I going to do that? Okay. So oh, what is the food like on board? Oh my. Do you want to take that one?
I can take that one. The food is plentiful. It's really very good food. And again, it can be completely surreal to be in an environment like this, so far from anywhere, surrounded by ice and crazy wildlife, to be eating really very delicious food. Breakfast and lunch are buffets, and dinner is a sit-down three-course meal every day. So the food is pretty great.
And I think that's one of the lovely things. And when you said, about no matter how bad the weather is and you just want to get off, and sometimes, it does, no matter how nice the ship is, sometimes you just want to get off and stretch your legs and get some fresh air, don't you? And I think that's one of the best things, is getting back onto the ship, taking your boots off, getting changed, putting a nice cozy hoodie on, go and get a cup of hot chocolate, and, go up and sit on the observation deck and go down for lunch, or get a freshly made biscuit or some other thing that they try and make you fat with. But yeah, it is fabulous. So you're not going to go hungry. So there's a few questions about, obviously there's been some stories about the rules and things changing and distance from things and sitting and standing and bending over and all that. And I think it's one of the reasons I wanted to show some of the photos was again because they weren't taken from lying on the floor. They were taken from, it was when all these rules were in place. You can crouch down, you just can't lie on the floor, but actually you don't need to. And rules change all the time, so who knows what they're going to be. But I don't know if you have anything to add, Isabel, or if
Yeah, that's a great question and something really worth addressing because, of course, with avian flu, things have had to change slightly, but it has been for a very long time that we're not allowed to approach the wildlife to more than 5 meters, which is more than close enough. And that's a very respectful distance, I think, of the wildlife. As it stands now for this season, yes, we are still not able to sit on the ground, and that includes kneeling as well. That's because we don't want to spread anything between the different colonies. As well as to enjoy and observe the wildlife, we're there to protect it as well, ultimately, which is why, as visitors, we are able to keep coming back year after year, which is fantastic. So we get back on board and disinfect our boots between every landing, which is good. But yes, that is the case for this year. This trip is almost a year and a half away, so it's possible that the regulations might loosen a little bit by then. I'm not really sure. But as it is now, yep, the precautions for avian flu are we can't sit down on the snow, at least in an area where there's high amounts of wildlife.
perfect. Thank you. And I think, it's the one thing to really focus on, that obviously that's why we're there. We're there to see the wildlife, and we want to be respectful, and we want to visit and not leave any trace of being there. So any risk that we could have to them, we want to try and avoid. So the guys on board are really good at, making sure that we are as clean as possible and as prepared as possible. But, it is for us to obviously be sensitive and to try and kind of do what we can as well. I'm going to just launch a poll, which I hadn't forgotten to, I promise. So I'm going to just launch that now because I just found it. So if anybody would like the travel plan for the trip in 26, please do let us know. We'll send that through to you tomorrow.
So just a couple more questions briefly. If I'm a solo traveler, what's it like? And that's a really great question. We do often have quite a few solo travelers on board. And it's just a lot of fun. It's as social as you want or not. I would say with Aurora Expeditions, and one of the reasons I keep coming back to that company is it's a fun, relaxed atmosphere on board. There's nothing very fancy about the atmosphere on board. We're there to have a great time, to have real wildlife experiences, and that runs through everything on board. So it's very friendly, very chatty, but also if you're there to have some peace and quiet, you're welcome to remove yourself as much as you like from that too. But you certainly won't be alone or by yourself. It's very friendly.
Brilliant. Thank you. So how many people on the ship? I think we covered that, but about maximum 130, isn't it?
Yeah, very maximum. Yeah.
Yeah. But yeah, probably normally sort of between 100 and 130. Clothing requirements for the ship. So yes, we do send out a packing list with a comprehensive list. But Isabel, do you just want to cover what is provided for everybody?
Yeah, so provided for everybody is an Aurora Expeditions outdoor jacket. So this is a jacket that you'll receive in your cabin when you arrive, and this is a multi-layer. There's a sort of a warm insulative layer and really quite a tough, durable, waterproof layer on top jacket, and they sort of zip together so you can wear them together or apart. And this is great. You're welcome to bring, of course, your own outer layer, but this one it's more than enough for any kind of weather conditions that we will encounter. We'd always recommend that people bring their own warm insulative jackets. I always wear a down jacket or a synthetic version of every time I'm off the ship, but I do feel the cold quite a lot. Also, what is provided is you're very welcome. Well, no, you will be borrowing our muck boots, so our waterproof boots. We have them in all different sizes. and you will be needing to wear these every time you get on and off the ship, and you'll be disinfecting them and scrubbing them and so on, coming back on board again. If you do tend to like wearing your own insoles, you're very welcome to bring your own insoles, put them inside, and don't forget to bring good, thick, warm socks with you to wear inside your muck boots as well.
And do you remember to take your insoles off the ship, which I didn't do.
Very good point. Very good point.
So some people will have some really nice insoles in their boots, won't they, from people like me?
Yes, we find them a lot. And as Emma mentioned, you'll be receiving a packing list, but we always recommend wool-based layers next to the skin, anything merino. Um, yeah, some spare gloves and hats in case yours get wet, that kind of thing.
And I think it's a really interesting thing, isn't it? You go to Antarctica and you think, I'm gonna be absolutely freezing, and it is, and yes, the likelihood is it will, but it can be warmer than you think. Like we had one of our landings, we went onto the land with, I think, about 6 different layers. And one of my rules on all my trips is to say dress like an onion, because you just want to peel off the layers and depending on how cold or hot it is, or put them back on again. And we were just peeling the layers off on this landing. And we had a barbecue on the deck that night, and everyone was outside in t-shirts dancing on the deck. And it was so surreal, but you just never know what it's going to be like. And the next morning, we almost couldn't land because the wind was so strong and there was snow blowing in our faces. So you've just got to be prepared for everything. So yeah, I think lots of layers, silk and wool lining things for gloves, and thermal leggings, thermal vests, all of that kind of thing. But we will definitely give you a packing list for that. Couple of questions about the Drake Passage. So I think as Isabelle said, it can go either way. And I was really lucky when I went over it that it was the Drake Lake. There were a couple of little bumps and we had a bit more of a bumpy time on the Scotia Sea. But it was actually fairly flat. So I know we've had people with the complete opposite, but you honestly just never know. There is a doctor on board at all times who can help, but there are some things that we would probably recommend, like patches that you can get to prevent seasickness, or pills, ginger, things like that. So there are lots of things that you can do. I don't know if Isabelle's got any good tips from experience.
I think being out on deck, if weather allows as much as possible, it's really the healthiest thing you can do, to just look at the horizon and have fresh air.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. How far in advance does the trip need to be booked? There's only 14 spaces, so the sooner the better. You don't want to miss out. You've seen what you can see now. How many different groups will be on the trip? That's quite difficult to know, I think. Obviously it depends. Oh, go on as well.
Well, it will be, like you say, we don't really know about other groups, but the rest of the passengers will be made up of a whole other passenger groups. So mainly people booking as individuals, I would imagine, and perhaps a few other groups spread among that. Yeah.
And that's, I think, going back to your thing about the solo travel, I was a solo traveler when I went in November, and actually it's a really nice thing to do, because you just get chatting to so many different people, and you can chat within your group. And that's the nice thing, I think, about having a smallish group, that you've got your group and you know who we are, but actually you can go and talk to anybody, and there's fascinating people from all around the world there. So there's lots to do and lots of people to meet. Couple of questions about the flights to Ushuaia. So generally, we'd recommend kind of a 3-day process. A, for comfort, and B, just in case anything happens with your bags. So we normally go to Buenos Aires, stay a night there, then fly down the next day to Ushuaia and probably spend a night there, and then board the next day. So it gives you time to get there and kind of acclimatize, but gives, if there's any issues, hopefully your bag time to get there. So there are various other things you can do. Some people also choose to extend in Chile or in Argentina. So there are various things that you can also add. But yeah, generally I would say add 3 days or so either side, just to be safe. Um, okay, so I think we're getting there. There's a few questions about cost. So what I would say, because there's so many different cabin types and different things that, that can affect it if there's a solo. Obviously, traveling as a solo traveler, you can share a cabin with somebody. Whereas normally on our trips, there's a single supplement, which is sort of just covering the room. On voyages, it does tend to be quite a bit higher, just because obviously you have to cover the whole cabin. So if you're happy to share with somebody else and you're happy to have a twin, then that's always an option. And then there would be no additional cost. So always worth considering if you're happy to share. But yeah, if you do want to see the costs or find out any more, then do just request an itinerary and let us know, and we'll send that through to you over the next couple of days. Okay, I think we have probably covered most of it. Oh, there was one actually that was quite interesting. About your citizen science photo where
Yeah,
there's
I
like the
saw that.
dirt. What is that?
That's a great question, Andrew. The photo of where I'm driving the Zodiac and showing people this grey mud. This is actually some glacial sludge that I've lent over the side of the Zodiac to a small iceberg, which has got some glacial moraine in it or mud from a glacier. And I just swiped it to show everybody what is inside of a glacier. I hope that helps.
Right, love it. Um, right. Yes, there was one other thing I just wanted to talk about baggage, because it's a question that we get a lot, and especially for photographers, because a lot of the flights down from Ushuaia have a very strict baggage policy of about 15 kilos. And I was absolutely terrified about it. And when I went, I think I managed to get it to about 20. And I was like, I'll just pay it. It'll be, however much it is. And it was £2.50. So I'm not saying take an awful lot, but don't panic too much. They're not going to not let you on the plane. You just have to pay a bit extra, but it's likely to not break the bank. So, obviously think carefully, and you do need layers and things, and they know that, but just don't be too worried about it. So yeah, I hope that helps if anybody's worrying about that. Okay, I think we're going to let you get on with your evening now. We've kept you long enough. Isabelle, thank you so much. Honestly, it's made me ridiculously excited about going back.
No,
Uh,
thank you for having me.
and I can't wait. I can't wait to go. And I'm very jealous that you'll be there in a few weeks, but have a fantastic season. Um, so from us, obviously this is, like I said, the first one of the autumn series. So we have a couple more. So Helen Bryan, who I've already mentioned, who is currently somewhere in the deepest, darkest Botswana, will be back by next week to talk about South Africa and then South America. So she will keep you entertained. There's a code there. So if you are interested in joining us, please do. It's going to be amazing. Just give us that Zoom code. Again, we'll send that out tomorrow, but you can get £100 off per person if you book by the end of the month. So if you are thinking about it, then let us know and hopefully we can get you booked on. So thank you so much for joining us, everybody. I hope you've enjoyed it. I've loved it. I think it's just incredible to hear about what an incredible place that we have a privilege to go to. So hopefully we'll see some of you on the trip. And if in the meantime, hopefully see some of you next week. But in the meantime, have a lovely evening and thanks very much.